Surveillance and the interception of private communications are techniques that are said to be vital to law enforcement. As the various tools used to conduct surveillance and interceptions have evolved, however, the statutory authority and laws that govern and restrict the use of those investigative techniques have not necessarily kept pace with the changes in how we communicate. Unlike traditional wiretapping, which should target a specific line of communication, there is a tool that is being used with increasing frequency called an IMSI catcher, or a Stingray, which is a device that can conduct mass surveillance over a given range and collect cell phone data in bulk. These devices impersonate cell phone towers, basically tricking the cell phone into relaying its signal through the Stingray, and in that process, identifying the phone and intercepting the information that is relayed. While certain data transmitted over cell phone spectrums like LTE or 3G are encrypted, one capability of the Stingray is to knock the signal down to a lower frequency like GSM, which is more than 20 years old and not as strongly protected. Failing that, there are tools available to law enforcement to decrypt that collected information, and it appears those tools are sometimes provided by the private companies responsible for encrypting the data in the first place. Because smartphones have become such a common appliance that we all use for a variety of daily tasks, the Stingray is capable of capturing information that is tremendously invasive. We use our phones not only to talk to each other, but for text and email conversations, to record and conduct financial transactions, to monitor our health information, and perhaps most importantly, our phones have become a homing beacon whereby our locations and therefore activities can be inferred and ascertained. Because these devices can create a cellular dragnet, it is not just the potential targets of the investigation whose information is collected, but any unsuspecting member of the public who happen to be within range. Stingray technology has existed and has been used for 20 years, and yet there remains uncertainty about the legal requirements and restrictions that should govern its use. And until recently, there has been little academic and judicial commentary about it in Canada or the US, and little policy debate, because law enforcement fought for years to keep these surveillance techniques hidden from the public. That has now changed. For instance, the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto collaborated with the Canadian Internet Policy and Public Interest Clinic at the University of Ottawa to produce an excellent report on the various legal issues associated with the use or overuse of IMSI technology. The Criminal Code of Canada contains a variety of electronic surveillance mechanisms. Conceptually, they can be divided into two broad categories. That is, information about a communication versus the content of a communication itself. For surveillance about a communication, the code provides in some instances for a lesser standard of reasonable suspicion, where the invasion of privacy is arguably minimal. For surveillance of the content of a communication, Part 6 of the Criminal Code, or the wiretapping provisions, require reasonable grounds to believe, a higher standard, along with additional other safeguards before the police can obtain a warrant. The issue we now confront is where on the spectrum the Stingray should fall. Fundamentally, the question is whether, in keeping with societal and legal norms in Canada, a person should reasonably expect that the information gathered through a Stingray should remain private. And from the answer to that question, a constitutional dialogue will emerge and the legal requirements for its use will develop.